President, we need to make the Europeans pay their fair share of our defense. Now, we need to do so in a respectful way because, look, we've fought side by them in 2 wars in the last century. But they should pay their fair share. Those are just a couple of the things that we can do. We can bring this debt down if we work together, we try to solve it together. I'm proud to be running as a veteran, and there are other veterans running around this country, and we have a plan to try to establish accountability in this body of our government and actually get something done.
Mike Kelly, 30 seconds.
Interesting. So you're the guy that said, if I get elected, we'll pull back on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And also in that, by the way, are the opportunity zones, the exact areas that you're talking about. 17 of them in our district now, 8 in Erie. So you're willing to say, I would go against that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act because all it does is favor the rich. You know, I don't think you read the bill. If you read the bill, you wouldn't be able to stand and make those statements. By the way, if you want to, I'll introduce you to the president on Wednesday. He'll be here. I know him pretty well, and I know the agenda that he's on. He is truly making America great again.
I met him before. I'd be happy to meet him again.
Marcus Atkinson, your question for Mike Kelly, please.
Erie has experienced a building and development boom in recent times, but some are fearful the investment will not reach into the neighborhoods and citizens that most need jobs and fair wages. Many call for a community benefits agreement, but aside from that, what specific programs do you suggest or endorse that will lift up those in the poor zip codes?
Yes, as you know, Mark, we did commit to the city several years ago what we called a private-public partnership to address the needs that we had in rebuilding our government buildings and our schools. We're over an academy, and I couldn't believe that the deterioration that had taken place in their locker room. The other thing is, if you want to talk about how you rebuild the city, then take a look at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The opportunity zones that my opponent just cannot seem to get his hands around. He thinks it's about the rich. Zip code 16501 is right in the city of Erie. It is the poorest zip code in Pennsylvania. That is one of the areas that would be an opportunity zone. The exact opportunity zone that you want to take down because you're so stuck on the rich. Only the rich got a benefit. That is the most blatant lie that's out there. Everybody benefited from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The average income, middle income people in 10 years will receive $24,000 more in their paychecks because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. How you can be against that, I have absolutely no idea.
Ron DiNicola, 30 seconds.
I support the benefits agreement process that Mr. Horton has championed. You've seen me work for community colleges. The best way that we can bring people out of poverty is providing them a pathway to education. And one of the ways to do that is through job training and skills training. That is a tangible and effective way that we can do it. I've also tried to create mentoring relationships in the community through the PAL program. But back to my opponent. I'm not suggesting the repeal of anything. What I am suggesting is that we need to have tax laws in this country that are fair to the middle class. I support
Joe Morris, your question for Ron DiNicola.
Those economic development incentives that are in those bills.
In recent years, the tone of the political discourse in this nation has changed. And in my humble opinion, it has not changed for the better. In fact, it seems that we have reached the point where compromise, bipartisan compromise, is virtually impossible. Do you see any room for compromise? If so, where? Is there any place that Democrats and Republicans can work together?
Well, we need compromise. It's essential, and we have to work towards that. One of the things we need to do is change the leadership in the House of Representatives. That's why I support changing the leadership on the Democratic side, and I've gone on record, even though my opponent tries to suggest otherwise. But we need to find common sense compromise. That's essential. Every once in a while we get that done. John McCain championed that. I worked with him on legislation. He was a guy that you could count on, and he would approach common sense solutions to the problems that we face. The problem that we have now is that too many members of Congress are in safe districts where they are not accountable to anybody, like we used to have here, where they don't have to stand up and present themselves and defend their record. That increases gridlock and ideological divide. We need to clear that up in many of the districts around this country, and we need to open the dialogue and discourse with new members of Congress.
Interesting. For a guy that would never vote for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And if you want to talk about polarization, do you know the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? Do you know how many Democrats voted for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? None. Not one in the House, not one in the Senate. So when my opponent says, oh yeah, we need to work together, If the majority were to change, he'll have a lovely chance to work with Nancy Pelosi, and who's just put out a statement today. The first thing we're going to do is to go after Trump, then we're going to go after Judge Kavanaugh to get them impeached. If that's the kind of working together you want, that's not the kind of working together that anybody would look at and say,
All right,
that's sane.
I need to follow up on this because I didn't hear either gentleman say how they would.
Can I go first now?
Just a second, how they would find compromise there, because we've outlined the problem. We know it exists. How would you solve the problem?
Okay, I'll go first on it.
Go ahead,
I'm on
Mike.
the Ways and Means.
30 seconds.
All right, I'm
for
on the
both
Ways and
gentlemen.
Means, and I'm on the tax writing thing. We could not get one Democrat to agree with anything in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and the reason they couldn't is because it wasn't their legislation. They were told by their leadership, if you vote for this, you'll never be back in the House again. That's what the problem is. Now, I agree with him when it comes to leadership, but the type of leadership we have is not the type of leadership that I want to embrace under Nancy Pelosi or Maxine Waters. I just think it's the worst way for the country to go. It is too polarized.
All right, 30 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, please, 30 seconds for Ron DiNicola.
You will not have compromise until you create districts that are competitive like this district has become. Because now you have to stand up and you have to defend your record. Somebody goes to Washington as safe seat, they have no incentive to compromise. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that the system is awash with dark money. More and more super PACs, 501c4s are contributing unlimited amounts of money in secret without disclosing their contributors, and we have to stop that. I'm supporting legislation to block it. My opponent has refused to sign on to those.
There's no such
Maggie,
legislation.
Maggie Hackney, your question for Mike Kelly, please.
According to a study by Forbes, student loan debt is at an all-time high. 44 million Americans collectively owe $1.5 trillion. What do you believe the federal government should be doing right now, if anything, to help make higher education more affordable for students?
Do you know what? I think that when you look at student loan debt, a lot of the debt that's out there is saddled or handled by people who really shouldn't have in the first place qualified for some of that debt. The programs that we had in place were to help those that were the most in need of that type of loan. It has morphed into something completely different. When you talk to college presidents, the biggest challenge they have right now is saying to their students, you don't have to pay this much. You're paying way too much right now. They don't need to have some of that money, but they're using it. So I would say looking at things objectively and putting together programs that allow some oversight on it. There's no oversight on these programs right now. We have $1.5 trillion. Do you know we show that as an asset? We show that as an asset on our books for the country. Do you know that more than half of it has never had one penny paid on it? If you're in a bank right now, if it goes beyond 60 days, it's no longer an asset. You have to charge it off. We continue to carry it on our books right now in our federal government as an asset. It is not an asset. It is a drag on our economy.
Ron DiNicola.
I think I just heard my opponent blame the kids. It's not their problem. It's not, and when you cut the Pell Grant program, and when you cut job care programs, you're no friend to creating a pathway for our kids to get to a place where they need to get to build a future for themselves. That's what we're trying to build. We do need to expand post-secondary educational opportunities. Not everybody is bound for college. Some people are bound for a trade school, and that's going to do very well for them. And some people that are bound for college are going to start in a trade school and then matriculate up. We need to create more opportunities, not less.
Jesri Friend, your question for Ron DiNicola.
Mr. DiNicola, Pennsylvania is now the second largest producer of natural gas in the United States. However, neighboring states such as New York are blocking the construction of pipelines that would transport Pennsylvania-produced gas to new markets and growing the Pennsylvania economy. What is your stance on the issue and pipeline development in general?
Well, I think we have to be very vigilant. I mean, look, it's a balancing, and that's what we have to do in Congress is balance interests. There are strong economic interests, and there are strong environmental interests. And I think we have to balance those by common sense rulemaking, common sense oversight, and making sure that we're moving the pipelines into places where they will not subject the region or the communities to undue harm or catastrophic occurrence. But that's going to take great skill, timing, and energy. But that's important. But I think we have to strike that balance.
Mike Kelly?
Oh, sure. I'm glad you feel that way because, as you know, with the Marcellus gas opportunity, we are no longer dependent on anybody in the world, bad actors, for our energy. We are energy independent. We will be the biggest exporters of energy in the world, and our cost of living is going down every day because of lower energy costs. So when you talk about energy, what you have to talk about is the benefit to the hardworking American taxpayer, the people that have to pick up the tab and all those bills. We've seen it reduced dramatically. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, your utility bills just went down again.
Question from Facebook. We'll start with Congressman Kelly.
Sure.
The futures of Medicare and Social Security are in doubt. What have you done, or what would you do to protect these programs? And the second part, would you support privatizing it all?
Well, first of all, what do we do to protect Social Security and Medicare? You know, as we know, the revenues from wage taxes is what provides the revenue for these programs. We have the highest number of people right now participating in the labor workforce. We are having more revenue come in now than we ever had. That's improving the economy. That's what picks up the tab on all of these programs. Now, when it comes to looking at them, Sean, as what you would do going forward, I think we all look at the same things. Are we spending the money the right way? Are we collecting it and watching how we do spend it? I know from my standpoint, I've got an award for being the champion of Social Security. I'm on the Social Security Subcommittee on Ways and Means. We work tirelessly to improve the process, to get rid of the fraud, get rid of anything in there that takes away from hardworking American taxpayers. It's their money, not the government money. It's that 6.2 match from the employer and from the employee that goes into the 12.4 match that funds Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. All of those are wage taxes. When you have a vibrant and robust economy, the revenue flows. It's just that simple. Tax Cuts, Jobs Act accomplished.
Ron DiNicola, 30 seconds.
You know, my opponent talks about the gas price relief that citizens have gotten. But, you know, if you happen to be a banker, at a major bank, you realize $2.6 billion in additional revenue in the first quarter this year. Now, that's not going back into the jobs. That's going into somebody's portfolio. That's going into the CEO's argument when he wants a bonus. So instead of making $100 million a year, now he's making $150 million a year. That's not helping the working families of Western Pennsylvania. That's just not in the playbook for us.
But would you privatize, gentlemen? 30 seconds for each.
No, I would not. I think that what we're doing right now makes sense, and the way we're going about it makes sense. We can take a look into all these programs going forward. The sustainability of any of our programs is the key for any of us, no matter what side of the aisle we're on. Is it sustainable, and are we getting the revenue sources from the right places, and can we sustain that revenue flow?
Mr. DiNicola.
With all due respect, that's disingenuous. You cannot blow up the deficit, 22 million. Now you've added another 2 trillion in deficit over the next 10 years. That's in addition to the 10 trillion that you're going to have anyway. What are they doing? They're setting up the cut on Social Security and Medicare because they're not going to have any other way to fund it. What they really should be doing is they should be building the economy with jobs that are helping working families improve their lot, expand post-secondary education, get more workers into the workforce, build the economy, and then we can actually, as Representative Kelly mentions, we can work our way through the Social Security issue. But we're not going to do it by blowing up the deficit and giving all the resources to the wealthy.
Your question for Ron DiNicola, please.
To stay with health care, on the 4th of October, the Wall Street Journal reported on its front page that the average family spends $20,000 on health care premiums. We're nearly 6 years into Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. Erie County is identical to all other counties in the United States, and counting our hospital system among the top 10 employers in the county, making the medical industry a vital employer of our citizens throughout the country. Where are you wanting to take us next in this health insurance journey? Single payer, fix Obamacare, return to predominantly private health care?
Well, I think what we have to do is we have to bring down the prices. We have to bring down the prices of pharmaceuticals, which isn't going to happen when we have a Congress that is controlled by the pharmaceutical industry. My opponent's taken over $250,000 from them. We need to bring down the profiteering of the pharmaceuticals. We need to bring down the profiteering of the insurance companies. But you're not going to see this out of that Congress because them, like my opponent, have taken over $250,000 from the health insurance business. So they're catering to them, and instead they're voting to marginalize and eliminate coverage for pre-existing conditions. They're voting to have 50-year-olds and up pay more than up to 5 times what they were paying before, and shifting the pharmaceutical costs to our seniors. That's not a recipe for solving the problem. What we can do, what we must do, is bring down those pharmaceutical costs, bring down the insurance costs, create efficiencies in the system, and try to move forward from there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to suggest you look at some of the legislation that I've sponsored. First of all, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, we are very much in favor of pushing for the cheaper drug that's out there, the more generic drug that's out there. The other thing, listen, that is unbelievable when you talked about pre-existing disease or conditions. The New York Post gave that a 4 Pinocchio, that it was absolutely false. We have always kept pre-existing conditions in there. And I would just suggest the people in the back of the room, now Ron, I'm going to watch your nose. If you keep talking this way, that nose is going to go the whole way out the back of this. If you could just stick to the truth, it'll make a big difference. Check it out. Check it out.
Joe Morris, your question for Mike Kelly, please.
All right. As a member of Congress, you will be and have been helping to lead our nation, a nation that is attempting to navigate some rough seas at home and abroad. To help us understand what type of leader you have been and what type of leader you will be as a member of Congress, can you please tell us which contemporary or historical leader you admire most and why?
I think it's, when I look at modern presidents, I really like Ronald Reagan. They would call Ronald Reagan the happy warrior, but Ronald Reagan existed before we had the social media where everybody pulls everybody apart. I think that if you were to look at Reagan in Reagan's years, his first part of his administration, he was laughed at, he was made fun of, but by the time the president had finished his 2 terms, the country was in much better shape. It was going so much stronger, great economic growth. We became respected around the world. We're witnessing that right now. I would suggest to anybody, look back 21 months ago. Are you doing better today than you were 21 months ago? Is America more respected in the world than it was 21 months ago? Are we seeing the type of growth that we promised our young people? And are we looking at an economic revival that lifts all boats, not just a few? I've watched this tonight, and I got to tell you, there's a huge difference between the two of us. Sticking to the facts and sticking to the truth would really be helpful. The legislation that I have been on and I've passed, I will gladly tell you, we have been on the winning side of all these issues, and in every measurable way, the United States of America is better today than it was 21 months ago because of this administration and this leadership.
Ron?
Trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. You cannot say this is a great time for our fiscal policy. It simply is not. It reminds me of the guy that jumps off the 50th floor and at the 25th floor somebody yells out, "How you doing?" and he says, "So far, so good." It is not going to work for us in the long term. It isn't going to work for the long term in stabilizing our finances. It isn't going to work in the long term for stabilizing Social Security and Medicare. We need to be more practical about how we approach those things. But let me talk about FDR. FDR was the original multilateralist who brought this nation through difficult times by...
All right, I'll repeat the question because I don't think you got to the answer, Ron. Don't worry. I'll repeat the question. The question was, what historical figure do you admire the most? Correct, Joe?
Historical leader. What historical leader?
Historical leader.
Well,
I said Ronald Reagan.
I've just finished the series on FDR, so I'm kind of in the FDR mode. But the fact of the matter is that he was the original coalition builder. He was the original multilateralist who brought people together, built coalitions, and helped win the war. I think that's what we need to do. But I also was a man of great civility and temperament, so he's my choice.
Okay, Mike.
Yes.
30 more seconds for you if you'd like to expound on that.
No, listen, I liked FDR too. In fact, if you were to go into my grandma Kelly's house after Mass on Sunday, they had a picture in the dining room. One was FDR, the other was the Lord, and they constantly got them mixed up. And that was because of the period that they grew up in. Listen, FDR did a great job. But when it comes to who do I admire the most in that presidential role, it's Ronald Reagan. Because of what he was able to do, take this country out of the morass it was in and put it into a successful path again. It was an incredible job that man did.
Maggie Hackney, your question for Ron DiNicola, please.
Several studies suggest that unarmed African Americans are twice as likely to be killed by a police officer compared to unarmed Caucasians. Why do you believe this is the case? And what, if anything, do you believe the federal government can do to address this serious issue?
Well, I've had some experience in this because I was a part of the Christopher Commission in Los Angeles after the Rodney King beatings. I've seen it close. it's a difficult problem. I think the federal government needs to take another look at the pattern and practice statutes on the books now, so that we can make sure we're doing everything that we can to prevent unintended, unwanted, violent acts against people of color or anyone else that's in a situation of being compromised when they have not done anything wrong. I think that's something that we need to work on, and we need to address it.
No, listen, I would just say this. Listen, all lives matter. I think we become so polarized about what we accept and what we don't accept anymore as being a life that matters. And I don't care if it's from conception or what happens on the streets or what happens in our schools. It is abhorrent what has happened. That's why I've been endorsed by FOP Lodge 7 right here in Erie. And I think, Ron, you have probably better experience with people who have killed people than anybody on the podium tonight. He's represented him. It's just the facts.
Jezri Friend, your question for Mike Kelly.
Congressman, most can agree that some regulation is necessary, but they can often be confusing, time-consuming, and difficult to interpret to our business owners. According to a 2017 study by the National Association of Manufacturers, the industry faces just shy of 300,000 restrictions on their operations just from federal agencies. 94% of manufacturers surveyed say the regulatory burden has gotten higher in the last few years, with 72% saying significantly higher. And 87% of those manufacturers surveyed say that if compliance costs were reduced permanently and significantly, they would invest the savings on hiring, increase salaries and wages, or capital replacement. Yeah. What are some examples of areas that you feel should be looked at to make sure there aren't unintended consequences for well-intended regulations?
Right. I think all of them start off as well-intended, but I will tell you, when President Trump came into office, we had the ability to pull back on regulations that were well-intended, were really causing great harm to us competitively around the globe. We had 16 regulations pulled back. If you were to talk to business leaders today, they will tell you that the tax cuts is a big deal with them. But more importantly is the rollback of regulations that were unnecessary and gone way beyond what they were intended to. That added cost to every single product or service that the United States produced. We're in a global economy, and you have to look around at who it is you're competing against. Why are they successful? Why are we not successful? And going forward, what can we do to change it? Very quickly, in the first part of this presidency, you have seen a rise in manufacturing jobs. You have seen the most significant rise in our economy that the country has ever seen. It's just facts.
And I would suggest to you, sir, that your comments about my constitutional duty are beneath the dignity of a member of Congress. And that's one of the reasons why you ought to step aside. That's one of the reasons why you ought to step aside. Now, you know, in terms of small businesses, I believe that we have to take a look at these regs. I meet with a number of small businesses. I just met with one the other day in Butler County. I think they are the engine of our economy. We need to make life easier for them as much as we can, consistent with our other obligations and responsibilities.
We have
common sense regulations. Common sense regulations.
One last
we should look
question. I'll make it a Facebook question from the audience. First of all, thank you to the panel. Wonderful job by the panel. The Facebook question, as long as we have brought up some of the subject matter in the ads, was both of you have run ads that are not complimentary of your opponent, shall we say. Do you believe in the power of negative campaigning? Do you stand by all of the claims that you have made against your opponent? That's to Ron, to start. Mr. DINICOLA.
We stand by the claims because they're verifiable. I don't like negative advertising any more than anybody else does. But we confine ours to the votes and to the issues, to the things that are going to come before the Congress. I think that's a critical distinction in our campaign, and I think that's unfortunately we need to communicate. We're being out-communicated because my opponent happens to have 3 times the money that we have. So we need to communicate. I would like it to be a more civil process. James Fallows calls it the trench warfare of American politics. Unfortunately, that's what it's become. Hopefully we can build a better version of America that reduces some of the rancor, at least in the halls of Congress.
No, I appreciate that, but I think the main purpose of all of us running, you have to distinguish yourself from the other person. There are distinct things that are going on in our country today. Who is it that you want representing you in Washington? Everything we have said about our opponent is absolutely true. I'm sorry, you weren't a public defender. You took on those cases because you got paid to take on those cases. In my case, I've been accused of being successful in life. You've also been successful. I've been accused of gaining great wealth while I was in Congress. The sale of a family-held business, 118 years old, is hardly an act of Congress. It is an act of commerce.
We have run out of time for our questions tonight, but we do have enough time for closing statements. I believe the first 90-second closing statement goes to Mr. DINICOLA.
So most of the cases that he referred to in his advertisement were 25 or 30 years ago. I was assigned to those cases by a judge or by my partners, my senior partners. But that's not really the point. That's not the point at all, actually. Let me say this, my friends. It's fitting that we meet in this institution of higher learning, this place of high purpose and deep faith. I'm on this stage tonight because the highest courts in our land determined that we needed to have a new district. And by their action, they placed in your hands greater power over your future, and that was their intention. My responsibility tonight is to give you a choice in the exercise of that power. And I make this simple pledge. You send me to Congress, I won't disappear. You send me to Congress, I'll fight for you. I will try to put the federal government back on the sides of working families, back on the sides of the communities, towns, and villages that are fighting for sustainability. I'll get the federal government to come back on our side. Gee whiz, I already got Donald Trump to come here in a couple of days. President Trump, excuse me. I will work with you in your communities. I will be present. I will hold town hall meetings. I will have office hours. You will be able to find me. I will conduct myself with professionalism and the appropriate decorum as a member of Congress.
Thank you, Mr. DINICOLA.
Thank you.
90 seconds to Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, I'm glad I could be here with Ron tonight. And I know that we have completely different views of what my record is. I would just tell you, when it comes to constituent service, out of the 435 members of the House and 100 members of the Senate, the Congressional Management Foundation found that our office was one of the top 3 in Washington. Also, when you look at who we are and where we are, we divided the district up into 3 areas so that none of our constituents would have to drive more than 45 minutes to get to an office. We have had more communication with this district than has ever been possible before, and a lot of it has to do with telephone town halls. We have had people participate as far away as the United Kingdom. I will just tell you this. There is a stark difference between us. There is a stark difference between it. If you want a bigger government that taxes you more, that regulates you more, that takes back your tax cuts, that says, look, those opportunity zones, no. That's just for the rich. No, that's not for the rich. Check 16501 zip code, and you tell me what I did as part of that Ways and Means was for the rich. That's not for the rich. You look at everything we've done, and I would just tell you again, for those of you sitting there, I don't care if you're a registered Republican or a registered Democrat, more than anything else, how much has your life changed in the last 21 months? How stronger has America become? We are no longer just part of the world. We are leading again because of strong Republican leadership.
Thank you, Congressman Kelly. Thank you to both our candidates. Thank you to both our candidates. And a huge thank you to our audience here at the Mary D'Angelo Center. And of course, a big thank you to you at home for taking part in tonight's debate. As we said, likely the only face-to-face debate in the 16th Congressional District.